Marcus Ellis didn't mind the noise of the donut shop beneath his apartment. The clinking of pans, the hiss of oil, the occasional burst of laughter from early morning regulars. It was the soundtrack of his mornings. Every day began the same. Up by 6 o'clock, out the door by 6:30, twin daughters bundled in matching coats, and the scent of glazed sugar clinging to their hair as they descended the stairs. At 37 years old, Marcus had accepted that life didn't care for symmetry. He worked 6 days a week at Nelson's Auto Repair, came home with grease under his nails, and wore shirts that never quite fit right, no matter how much he spent on them. Size 4XL was hard to come by, and we did find one. It didn't take long for a coffee stain, mustard smear, or soda splash to leave its mark. The shirt today was a light gray, now darkened at the belly by a recent root beer accident. He hadn't even noticed when it happened. He rarely did. But Ava and Lily noticed everything else. "Daddy, you wore the funny shirt again," Ava giggled, brushing off a crumb for his shoulder. "You mean the lucky one," Marcus corrected, adjusting the backpack strap on her tiny frame. Lily, always a more serious twin by a fraction, tugged at his sleeve. "You forgot your hat. Your ears will freeze." Marcus laughed. "Then I guess we better run to the truck before they fall off." They always laughed at that, the idea of their father's ears bouncing down the street like runaway muffins. He scooped them up, one in each arm, and carried them to the crisp Milwaukee morning, his boots crunching against the frosted sidewalk. To them, he was larger than life, not because of his size, though they loved how he could lift them both at once without flinching, but because he made their world feel safe, like a well-worn blanket wrapped around the shoulders. He was warm and funny, and told stories with wild voices and sound effects. He let them pick their own bedtime stories, even when they chose the same one 5 nights in a row. At home, Marcus Ellis was a king, but the world outside had a shorter memory and a sharper tongue. At the corner deli, a woman glanced at him and then quickly looked away, nudging her friend with raised brow. At the crosswalk, a teenage boy muttered, "Dude looks like a busted vending machine," just loud enough to make his friends snort with laughter. And always, there were the whispers, not loud enough to demand a response, but sharp enough to draw blood. Still, Marcus kept his head up. The girls were watching. He buckled them into their booster seats in the back of his rusty pickup, the one with the cracked windshield and the tape over the radio dial. As he slid into the driver's seat, his bones creaked and his knees protested. He adjusted the rearview mirror just in time to see Lily squish Ava's cheeks with her mittened hands. "Daddy's the strongest daddy in the world," she declared. Stronger than Thor, Ava added. Marcus turned the key and smiled. "Don't tell Thor. He's sensitive." The truck coughed to life. They drove in silence for a moment, passing the same brick buildings and the same shuttered storefronts. On the radio, a familiar jingle played from a local insurance company. Marcus tapped the wheel to the beat, then caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, the double chin, the tired eyes, the stubble he hadn't shaved in 3 days. But when he looked at his daughters, all he saw was sunlight. That afternoon, as they walked home after school, Ava pointed out a cloud shaped like a dinosaur. Lily insisted it looked more like a squirrel riding a skateboard. Marcus squinted up at the sky, pretending to deliberate. "I think it's both," he decided. "A dino squirrel. Very rare, very dangerous." They howled with laughter. They reached the block where their apartment sat, just as the orange glow of sunset began painting the shop windows. The donut shop was closing, and the air smelled like powdered sugar and cinnamon. Marcus reached for the door when Ava tugged at his arm again. "Pick us up again," she said. "Please." Lily added. Marcus hesitated. His back already ached from the day, but then he bent down and scooped them up with a groan and a grin. He spun them in a slow circle, their shrieks echoing down the street. And that's when he felt it, the stairs. From across the street, through a steamed-up cafe window. From the couple walking a dog on the sidewalk. From the teenagers loitering outside the laundromat. Some looked amused. Some looked pitying. Others just whispered. He caught a fragment, just a flicker of a sentence drifting on the air. "Still single. You know why." He smiled anyway and lowered the girls back to the ground. Inside the apartment, The girls flopped onto the couch while Marcus reheated leftover spaghetti. The radiator hissed in the corner. The walls were thin, the floorboards creaky, but it was warm. Safe, full of laughter and spaghetti stains and drawings taped to the fridge. Outside, the world had its opinions. But in here, he was just Daddy. The best daddy. The only one they'd ever want. And as they drifted asleep, heads touching in the middle of their shared bed, Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them breathe. He pulled the door gently until it clicked shut, then turned toward the kitchen. A soda stain on his shirt, a whisper in the wind, but his heart full. Saturday afternoons were sacred in the Ellis household. It was the only time of the week when there were no errands, no car engines to fix, and no schoolwork demanding attention. Marcus made a point to turn off his phone, forget the calendar, and follow the whims of his daughters. Sometimes that meant building forts out of couch cushions. Other times, it meant walking aimlessly through the streets of their neighborhood, armed with nothing more than curiosity and the occasional powdered donut. On this particular Saturday, the air was sharp and dry, with a cold wind rolling in from the lakefront. Ava and Lily had insisted on wearing their sparkly scarves and winter boots that squeaked with every step. They marched ahead, laughing at some joke only they understood, while Marcus trailed behind with 2 empty hot cocoa cups in one hand and a half-eaten cinnamon roll in the other. He didn't rush them. Watching the twin parade down the sidewalk with total freedom made the tightness in his chest loosen. They were turning the corner past an old record store when Lily came to a sudden halt, nearly causing Ava to trip over her. "Wait!" she shouted. Ava gasped, following her sister's outstretched finger. "There!" Marcus looked up, unsure what had captured their attention so quickly. They were both standing at the window of a small boutique wedged between a florist and a frame shop. The glass was clean and clear, offering an unobstructed view of the interior. Inside, a tall woman with long, wavy brown hair stood beside a clothing rack, adjusting a green dress on a mannequin. She was laughing at something a customer had said, her face alight with a kind of natural charm that pulled attention without even trying. Lily pressed her mittened hands against the window. "She looks like a princess." Ava nodded, more emphatic. "We want this one, Daddy." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "You want her?" "No, silly," Ava said, not taking her eyes off the woman. "We want her to be our new mommy." Marcus laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. "That's not how it works, sweetie." "But she's perfect," Lily said seriously. "She's pretty, and she smiles a lot. And she looks like she smells like cupcakes," Ava added, completely sincere. Inside the boutique, the woman looked up. For a brief second, her eyes met Marcus's. She didn't smile or wave, just looked at him, puzzled, as if trying to play a memory that danced just out of reach. Then the moment passed. She returned to her customer, unaware of the conversation happening just outside her window. "Come on, girls," Marcus said gently. "Let's keep walking." He took their hands and led them away, but not before glancing back one last time. The woman was gone from view now, replaced by a rack of dresses that shimmered under the overhead lights. The girls chattered all the way home, theorizing about the woman in the boutique. Lily decided she must be a retired ballerina who now designed dresses for magical creatures. Ava argued that she probably lived in a secret castle just outside the city limits and only came to town when the stars aligned. Marcus said nothing. He just listened, letting their imaginations fill the silences he couldn't. That night, after they were asleep, Marcus sat in the living room and stared out the window at the quiet street. He thought about the boutique, the green dress, the way the woman's laugh had seemed to light up the space around her. There was something familiar in her posture, the easy way she moved, the spark in her expression. He tried to remember if he had seen her before, but nothing came to mind. He shook his head and turned on the television. A late-night comedy show was airing, full of canned laughter and rapid-fire jokes. He watched without really absorbing it. His mind was still on the boutique, and the girls' voices echoing, "We want this one, Daddy." The next day, he mentioned the boutique in passing while fixing the hinge on their bathroom door. "Do you think she'll still be there next weekend?" Lily asked. "We should go check," Ava said immediately. "Maybe she'll remember us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. She didn't even see you. She saw you, Lily corrected, matter of fact. And you saw her. He dropped the screwdriver. I'm just saying, don't get your hopes up. But the seed had been planted. The rest of the week passed in a blur of routine. Marcus returned to the garage, where the scent of motor oil was constant and the radio was always stuck on a classic rock station. He worked through backaches and cold coffee, and every night he returned home to Ava and Lily, who had begun sketching mommy candidates on loose-leaf paper. Some had capes, others had unicorns. Friday afternoon brought a surprise. While picking up the girls from school, the teacher handed him a packet of forms, and at the bottom, a pink flyer advertising Family Talent Night in bold glittery letters. He barely registered it, distracted by a text from his boss about a missing alternator. We signed you up, Ava said brightly. What? He asked, startled. For Talent Night. Lily confirmed. You're going to sing. Marcus blinked at the flyer. Girls, I haven't been on stage since. You're so good, Daddy. Ava interrupted. You sing all the time in the car. That's different. That's just me being silly. Lily tugged at his sleeve again. Please, Daddy, you'll be amazing. He stared down at their expectant faces. He wanted to say no. Every fiber of his adult self screamed to shut it down, avoid embarrassment, keep the routine. But he saw the hope in their eyes, the way their fingers gripped the edge of the flyer, like it was a ticket to a better world. So he nodded. All right, he said quietly. Let's do it. Their cheers echoed through the hallway, loud enough that a few other parents turned to look. Marcus pretended not to notice. Later that evening, while Ava and Lily were drawing stick figures with microphones, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flyer again. The words danced in his mind. Family Talent Night. Come show us who you are. Who was he? A mechanic with a soda-stained shirt. A single dad with a bad knee and an aching back. A man with more silence in his nights than conversation. But maybe, just maybe, there was still more to him than that. He picked up his phone and searched for local music stores. He hadn't touched a guitar in years, but the thought of one in his hands again stirred something dormant. A name caught his eye. Porter's Music Shop. Small, independent, nearby. He made a mental note to visit the next day. But even then, he didn't know that behind the counter of Porter's Music Shop, waiting with a green dress still fresh in his memory, would be a woman who'd already crossed paths with his daughter's dreams. And his own, whether he realized it or not. It was supposed to be a simple errand. Marcus had driven to the nearest gas station after dropping the girls off at school, his truck sputtering in protest as it pulled into the faded lot. The air was thick with the tang of diesel and burnt coffee, and the convenience store buzzed with a tired kind of life. A man arguing with a lottery machine, a clerk scrolling through his phone behind the counter, and teenagers loitering by the refrigerators near the back. Marcus just needed to fill up the tank and grab a bag of pretzels for his late morning snack. He wore an old hoodie with the name of a garage that had closed down 5 years ago, and his beard was due for a trim, but he didn't expect to be noticed. He never expected to be noticed. That's why the voices caught him off guard. Two boys, maybe 16 or 17, stood near the coffee machine, their eyes darting toward him in a half-hidden, half-daring way teenagers often did when they thought they were being subtle. He wouldn't have even registered their presence if he hadn't walked past them on his way to the checkout line. That's him, one whispered. Marcus froze, pretending to look at a rack of gum. The guy who lives above the donut shop, with the kids, doesn't go anywhere, ever. The second boy snorted. Yeah, I heard he's like, always there, like part of the building. Still single, right? Duh, too fat to marry. Even his shadow would swipe left. The laughter was quiet, but sharp. Marcus turned his head slightly, enough to see the smirk on one of their faces before they caught his gaze and quickly looked away. He didn't say anything. He just moved past them, grabbed his pretzels, and paid for his gas. The clerk didn't look up once. Outside, the sky had gone gray, the kind of muted overcast that made everything feel colder than it was. Marcus filled the tank with one hand, the pretzel bag crinkling under his arm. He kept his eyes on the numbers climbing on the pump, trying to focus on the mundane. But the words lingered like smoke. Too fat to marry. Even his shadow would swipe left. By the time he got back into the truck, his jaw was tight. He tossed the pretzels onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and sat for a moment. The heater kicked in with a mechanical groan, blowing lukewarm air onto his windshield. His hand stayed on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. The truth was, he'd heard worse before. Years ago, back when his ex had left, people had plenty to say. Some had been blunt. Others had hidden their judgment behind forced sympathy. But this careless cruelty from two strangers who didn't even know his name, cut in a different way. He hadn't realized how much he'd changed until that moment. He used to let comments like that roll off his back. Used to laugh them off or bury them under work and exhaustion. But lately, since the girls had dragged him into a talent show he hadn't agreed to, since they'd pointed at a stranger in a dress and declared her their future, something had started to shift. His heart had started to feel again, and now it could bruise. By the time he picked up the girls from school, the weight of that morning still sat on his shoulders like a lead coat. But he smiled as they ran to him. Ava with paint on her sleeve, Lily with a new paper crown she insisted was enchanted. He opened the door to the truck, lifted them inside, and kept his voice light as they recounted every detail of their day, from cafeteria drama to a ladybug found on the windowsill. They didn't notice his silence. Not at first, but 10 minutes into the drive, Ava looked up from her juice box. "Daddy, are you sad?" He blinked. "What?" "No, just tired." Lily leaned forward, squinting at the back of his head. "You're not smiling with your eyes." Marcus chuckled, forcing some warmth into his voice. "Is that so, detective?" "You always smile with your eyes," Ava added, "but not today." He didn't know how to explain what had happened. Didn't want to burden them with the ugliness of the world outside their bubble. They were still too young to understand the way people could shrink you with a single sentence. So he said the only thing he could think of, "I'm just thinking about the talent show." That seemed to satisfy them, and they launched into a new discussion about costumes. Ava wanted sparkles. Lily was leaning toward feathers. Marcus listened, nodding when appropriate, but his mind kept circling back to that gas station, to the sound of muffled laughter, to the way it felt to be reduced to a joke. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, he found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror. He studied his face, the creases forming deeper at the corners of his eyes, the extra weight around his chin, the way his shoulders sloped from years of lifting engines and carrying groceries up 2 flights of stairs. He wasn't proud of how he looked, but he wasn't ashamed either. Not until other people reminded him that maybe he should be. He turned off the light and went to bed, but sleep was slow to come. The next morning, he drove past the boutique again. Not on purpose, he told himself. It was just on the way to the grocery store. But as he approached, he slowed the truck, scanning the window. There she was, the woman in the green dress. Not wearing it this time, but standing beside a mannequin dressed in something floral and elegant. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she was laughing again, always laughing. It lit her face in a way that made the world seem softer. She didn't see him. He drove on. By Sunday, the comments at the gas station had dulled to a background ache, the kind you notice only when you're trying to be still. But Marcus wasn't still. He threw himself into chores, cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, made pancakes for dinner, and watched 2 full episodes of an animated show he didn't understand just to make the girls laugh. But it was there, under everything. The voice that said he wasn't enough, that he was too much, in all the wrong ways. It made him doubt the talent show. Made him doubt the smile that had briefly curled his lips when he saw the music shop's address. Made him question whether stepping on that stage was an act of courage or delusion. But then, late that night, he heard Ava whispering. "Do you think Daddy's scared?" she asked from their shared bed. "Maybe," Lily replied, "but we'll clap really loud. Louder than anyone." Marcus, listening from the hallway, felt something tighten in his throat. He hadn't realized how badly he wanted to be seen, really seen, by someone who didn't already love him by default. But maybe, just maybe, their faith in him could carry him a little further, past the whispers, past the jokes. He would go to the music shop tomorrow, because maybe it was time to remind himself of who he used to be and who he could still become. Monday morning started as they all did, rushed, messy, filled with toast crusts and forgotten mittens. Marcus moved through motions, still carrying the invisible residue of the weekend, the sting of overheard comments, the weight of expectations he never asked for. But by the time he dropped Ava and Lily off at school, something else lingered in his chest, something less bitter, though just as foreign resolve. He'd promised him he'd do the talent show, and despite the discomfort clawing at his insides, he wasn't going to break that promise. Still, he hadn't yet figured out what he would actually do on stage. Singing seemed logical. It was something he'd done in another life, before diapers and double shifts and small apartments. But logic wasn't the same as confidence. He hadn't stood in front of an audience since high school choir, and even back then, his role was mostly background harmonies and turning pages to the accompanist. But now, it wasn't just about him. His daughters had signed him up. Their belief in him was so unshakable that it bordered on sacred. That thought alone was enough to propel him toward the music store after work that evening. Even though his hands were still stained with oil and his back ached from crawling under a sedan for most of the afternoon, the bell above the door jingled as he stepped into Porter's music shop. The place smelled like dust, pine wood, and something warm he couldn't name. Not cinnamon, not vanilla, but nostalgic in a way that struck him like a childhood memory. The walls were lined with instruments he hadn't touched in years, violins in glass cases, rows of guitars on metal pegs, a worn piano in a corner with keys the color of old teeth. Behind the counter stood the woman. She wasn't wearing the green dress this time. Instead, she wore jeans and a loose cardigan, her hair pulled into a low bun that was slowly coming undone. She was helping a teenage boy pick out a clarinet reed and didn't look up immediately when Marcus entered. He hovered by the front display, pretending to study the ukuleles while his heart thudded too loudly in his ears. Then she saw him. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No dropped objects, no swelling music, just a soft flicker of recognition across her face. Her brows lifted slightly, her head tilted, and the corner of her mouth twitched into something close to a smile. "You again," she said, walking toward him once the teen had left. "Donut shop dad." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me? You were outside my boutique last weekend, with the twins, pressed up against the glass like they'd seen Santa Claus." "Oh," he chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, that was... They tend to pick future moms at random." She laughed, and it was even warmer up close. "Well, I'm honored. I didn't realize I was up for adoption." He smiled. "You run both shops?" "No, the boutique belongs to my sister. I was helping out for a few hours. I usually stay here. Music's more my thing." "Mine too. Sort of. I used to play," Marcus said, letting his gaze wander to a row of acoustic guitars. "It's been a while." "Anything in particular?" "Guitar. And some vocals. But mostly just for fun. These days, I mostly sing to steering wheels and shampoo bottles. Those are the most loyal audiences." He chuckled again, less awkward this time. I actually came because of something at my kid's school. Talent night. They signed me up without asking. Brave girls," she said, "or very dangerous. Both can be true." Marcus gestured toward the instruments. "I thought maybe if I could find a guitar that didn't hate me, I could remember how this all used to feel." She nodded. "Take your pick. Try a few." He wandered toward the back of the store, where the higher-end guitars lived. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, maybe a sign, or at least something that wouldn't buzz on an E string. His fingers hovered over polished mahogany and pine, finally settling on a modest dreadnought with a smooth neck and strings that didn't look too intimidating. He sat on the nearest stool and strummed lightly. The chord rang out a little flat, but clean. His fingers stumbled over a few progressions, stiff from disuse. But after a few minutes, the muscle memory kicked in. The shapes returned. The rhythm settled. He played half a verse of a song he hadn't heard in a decade, and when he looked up, she was still standing nearby, arms crossed, watching quietly. "You're good," she said. "I used to be better." "You're not doing it for them." she replied. You're doing it for your girls, right? He nodded. Yeah. Then you're exactly good enough. He didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments always felt like shoes that didn't quite fit. Nice in theory, awkward in practice. After a few more chords, he stood and gently placed the guitar back on its stand. I might come back for it, he said, once I figure out if I have the nerve. I'll keep it tuned, she replied. He nodded, thanked her, and left the shop feeling lighter than when he entered. But the week didn't stay light. Thursday brought a curveball. At school pickup, a teacher Marcus barely knew flagged him down with a clipboard in one hand and a crumpled paper in the other. Mr. Ellis? Just a heads up. We're confirming acts for the talent night next Friday. Ava and Lily signed you up, and it looks like you're closing the show. Marcus blinked. Closing? Like last? The teacher nodded. Your daughters were very persuasive. Something about sparkles and epic finales. Marcus swallowed. Of course they were. The teacher handed him a copy of the performance list, covered in glittery stickers. Rehearsals start next week. Don't worry, it's all low pressure. Low pressure. Marcus tucked the paper into his jacket and walked to the truck in a fog. The girls were waiting inside, beaming. Did she tell you? Ava asked. You're going last. Lily squealed. Like the big finale in the movies. Marcus put the key in the ignition. You two really set me up. It's because you're the best one, Ava said. No one else is a singing dad, Lily added. He drove in silence, the weight of the final act pressing harder than he expected. He hadn't even committed to the guitar yet. He hadn't decided what to sing. And now there would be an entire auditorium waiting for him to deliver some kind of magical ending. Still, as the streetlights flickered to life outside the truck windows, he glanced at the girls in the rear-view mirror, Ava with jelly on her cheek, Lily trying to braid her scarf. And he thought, maybe it didn't matter what the world expected. Maybe it only mattered what they believed. And they believed in him, which meant somehow he had to start believing too. The next Saturday, Marcus stood outside Porter's music shop once again, hands deep in his jacket pockets, rehearsing the conversation he hadn't planned. The sky hung low with thick, uncommitted clouds, threatening snow, but never quite delivering. His breath clouded in front of him as he stared at the familiar sign. Inside, faint music played, something mellow, bluesy, finger-picked on a hollow-body guitar. He hesitated for a few more seconds before finally pushing the door open. The same warm scent of wood, and dusk greeted him. The store wasn't busy. A young couple browsing keyboards near the front, and a man hunched over a banjo near the back. But what made Marcus freeze wasn't any of them. It was her, the woman from a boutique. Natalie was once again behind the counter. This time she wore a red flannel shirt under a denim vest, a pencil tucked behind one ear, and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up from her repair ticket and offered a small, knowing smile. "You're back," she said, removing the glasses and folding them neatly beside the register. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I wasn't sure if you'd be here." "I live here," she said, half joking. "Practically. I guess that makes two of us, living where we work. Let me guess, you're here for the Dreadnought again." Marcus smiled sheepishly. "Guilty. I've been keeping it tuned for you. Didn't want it to feel abandoned." She motioned toward the back where the guitar wall was, and he followed, the weight of his week finally starting to loosen as he reached for the instrument. It felt familiar now, not just in the wood and strings, but in the way the store itself wrapped around him, like the places he once knew before life became narrower, before everything was shaped around utility instead of joy. He played a little more confidently this time. A few chords, a short riff. Nothing fancy, but it filled the quiet air between them. "So," Natalie said after a moment, leaning against a display case, "what's the plan for the school talent night you're apparently headlining? You heard about that? I know a few parents from a PDA. Word travels fast." Marcus groaned. "Great. I haven't even picked a song yet. What are your girls like?" "There's 7. They like glitter and snack cakes and cartoon-themed songs." Natalie tilted her head. "So maybe not Johnny Cash." "Probably not," he agreed. though Ava would appreciate the drama of it. She smiled again, but it wasn't just polite this time. There was a softness in her eyes, something thoughtful. "You know," she said after a moment, "you don't strike me as someone who likes being in the spotlight. Yet here you are, guitar in hand, signed up for the last act of the night. I'm just trying not to let them down." Natalie nodded, folding her arms across her chest. That's the kind of dad they'll remember forever. Marcus looked up, the compliment landing somewhere deep beneath the surface. "I used to sing with my brother," he said suddenly. "Back in high school. Harmonies and acoustic sets. Coffee shops, church events. We thought we were going to make it big." "What happened?" "He made it. Moved out west. Became a session guitarist. Got married. I stayed. And kept things running. I guess," Marcus said, strumming a slow, minor chord progression. "You ever feel like you blink and end up living a version of your life you never planned for?" "All the time." He paused. "What was your plan?" Natalie laughed softly, and for a second, it sounded like there was more weight behind it than she let on. "I was supposed to be a music therapist. Studied it in college. Interned at a hospital. Thought I'd spend my life using sound to heal people. But life redirected me. My mom got sick. My sister needed help with her business. I stayed, just like you. So now you sell guitars instead of saving the world. And you fix cars instead of playing Madison Square Garden." Marcus chuckled. "Maybe we're exactly where we're meant to be. Or maybe," she said gently, "we're both just circling back to who we were before everything got complicated." He met her eyes, and for a long moment, neither of them looked away. There was no flirting, no awkward fidgeting, just recognition. A quiet understanding that both of them carried stories under the surface, years layered thick with compromises and necessary choices. And somehow, they had ended up here, not whole maybe, but still trying. Natalie eventually broke the silence. "So, what kind of song are you thinking? You have a week, give or take. I want something simple, but real." She moved toward a stack of music books, rifling through one until she found a dog-eared page. She handed it to him without explanation. Marcus scanned the chords. It was an old folk tune, understated but sincere, the kind of song that told the truth without trying too hard. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, this could work." "I thought so." He ran through it once, faltering at the bridge, but by the end of the second verse, the melody felt natural in his throat. Natalie watched silently. When he finished, she offered a small clap. "You've got a voice that makes people listen. Or a face that makes them stare," he said before he could stop himself. She didn't laugh. Instead, she walked over to the counter and returned with a small, beaten-up metronome and a capo. She handed them to him. "No more apologizing for yourself," she said quietly. "Not here. Not on that stage. Not in front of your girls." Marcus stared at the items in his hands, then at her. "Thanks. Come back in a few days. I'll help you run through it." He left the shop with the songbook under his arm and something else inside him. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the first spark of it. That night, as the girls danced around the living room, choreographing moves to a pop song blaring from the old stereo, Marcus strummed the melody Natalie had given him, adjusting his tempo to match their footwork. They didn't notice what he was playing, but he noticed something else. He wasn't thinking about the comments from the gas station. He wasn't wondering if people would laugh at him. He wasn't imagining the worst. He was just present, playing, listening, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. By Tuesday, the shift in Marcus was beginning to show, not in grand, dramatic gestures, but in the quieter ways that only those paying close attention might notice. He started standing just a little straighter when walking into the schoolyard to pick up Ava and Lily. He said good morning to people he used to avoid eye contact with. And when he passed by the large flyer on the school bulletin board advertising the upcoming family talent night, he no longer felt the sting of dread behind his ribs. Instead, he felt something like anticipation, raw and unshaped but unmistakable. But the world had its own rhythm, and it didn't always welcome change with open arms. The first comment came at the hardware store. He was standing in the checkout line, holding a small box of screws and a replacement light bulb, when he overheard two men in paint-stained jackets chatting near the entrance. One of them nodded in Marcus's direction. "Hey, isn't it the guy with the twins? Lives over by the donut place." "Yeah, the big fella. Mechanic, right? Apparently, he's doing the school talent show. Someone said he's the final act." There was a beat of silence, then a low chuckle. "What's he gonna do? Sit on the stage and make it collapse?" Marcus didn't react. Not outwardly. He paid for his items, nodded politely at the cashier, and walked out without saying a word. But as he got into his truck, the echo of that laugh folded itself into the quiet of the cab, lodging beside all the others. He tried to shake it off, but the comments kept coming, not always malicious, but rarely kind. At the barber shop, while waiting for Ava and Lily to finish their trims, one of the older regulars muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "If he thinks that stage is ready for him, he better hope the school has reinforced beams." Laughter followed, a blend of discomfort and cruelty that made Marcus's ears burn. The worst part wasn't that people talked. It was how quickly they did it. As if the moment Marcus dared to be more visible, dared to let something hopeful show, they instinctively reached for their dullest weapons. Their jokes, their sideways glances, their assumptions dressed up as humor. And it wasn't just the men. At the grocery store, two mothers from the school's PTA stood near the frozen foods aisle, sipping overpriced coffee and discussing the show. One of them spoke Marcus's name in that sugary tone that always carried hidden knives. "I think it's sweet, really, trying to show the girls he's involved. But don't you think it's a bit theatrical? I mean, closing the show? Who decided that?" "Maybe they just want to get all the clapping out of the way early," the other replied. They laughed, and Marcus, who had paused near the frozen peas, turned down another aisle before they could see his face. That evening, after dinner, he set up in the garage. He waited until the girls were deep into their homework and cartoons before sneaking down the back stairs, guitar case in hand, the soft thumb of his boots muffled by the old carpet runner. He clicked the door shut behind him and flicked on the overhead bulb. It buzzed and flickered before settling into a dull yellow glow. The garage wasn't insulated, and the October air leaked into the cracks in the door, but it didn't matter. This was a space, half storage, half sanctuary. Shelves lined with old car parts, boxes of tools, and dusty trophies from a time when his last name was still read aloud at talent shows instead of muttered in supermarket gossip. He sat on a stool, pulled out the guitar, and started from the beginning. It didn't sound perfect. His voice cracked on the higher notes, and his fingers stumbled once or twice. But he didn't stop. He played to the discomfort, the cold, the phantom echoes of every cruel word. He played until his throat ached and his fingers were sore. He played because every time he thought about quitting, he saw Ava and Lily in the front row, clapping with hands too small for their faith, eyes too wide for disappointment. The next morning, Lily noticed the calluses returning on his fingertips while he helped her tie her shoes. "You've been practicing," she said, squinting up at him like a detective with a hunch. "A little," he admitted. "Good," she said. "You're going to be the best one." He ruffled her hair, trying not to let the emotion rise too visibly in his face. But by Thursday, the murmur around town had become hard to ignore. Someone had even scrawled a crude joke about Marcus on the back of the restroom door at Nelson's Auto Repair. He caught one of the new hires snickering at it during lunch break. The shop foreman had it scrubbed off by the next shift, but the damage had already been done. Marcus stayed late at work that day. Not because there was too much to do. Most of the jobs had been clear by 5, but because he needed the time alone under the hood of a car, letting the rhythm of tools and grease silence the inner noise. He worked through the growing knot of frustration and hurt, pouring it into tightening bolts and cleaning spark plugs. He didn't tell the girls about the things he'd heard. He didn't tell anyone, but it wore on him. That night, he skipped practice. He sat on the couch while the girls built a fort out of pillows and blankets, their laughter bubbling around him like insulation. He smiled when they brought him imaginary cups of tea, laughed when they made him wear a tiara as king of the cozy castle, and nodded along when they asked if they could wear glitter on stage. But inside, he was already retreating. Later, after they were asleep, he returned to the garage, but left the guitar in its case. He just sat there, hands resting on his knees, listening to the silence. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was ridiculous to think anyone wanted to see a man like him on stage. Maybe the girl's belief was just that, a child's fantasy, too fragile to stand up to the weight of real life. The whispers were louder now, not just outside, but in his own head. And the worst part was they were starting to sound familiar. Saturday morning arrived with a strange stillness. The apartment above the donut shop usually buzzed with energy by mid-morning. The twins running from room to room, Marcus half-dressed and looking for missing socks, the faint scent of fried dough and coffee drifting upward from below. But that morning, the apartment was unusually quiet. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring through the frosted window at the empty street. The guitar sat untouched in its case in the corner of the living room. He hadn't practiced the night before, hadn't even opened the case. He'd barely slept. The noise in his head had grown louder, fed by every joke, every look, every whispered remark that lingered long after the moment had passed. The cruel voices weren't just coming from strangers now. They were repeating in his own mind, over and over, until they became indistinguishable from his own thoughts. Ava and Lily noticed a shift. They always noticed. "Daddy," Ava said gently, poking her head out from behind a wall of couch cushions. "You didn't sing last night." He looked up. "I know, sweetheart. Just needed a break." "Are you mad?" Lily asked, appearing beside her sister. "No, baby. I'm just tired." The girls exchanged a look. Not the playful, wordless kind they shared when they were scheming about dessert or choreographing a dance. This one was quieter, more serious. Like they were silently agreeing that something had to be done. "We're going to the living room," Ava announced, pulling Lily by the hand. "No dads allowed until we say." Marcus nodded absently. "Just don't break anything." He didn't hear much for a while. Only the occasional thump, the swish of blankets being dragged, the low murmur of urgent whispers between the twins. He assumed they were building another fort or acting out a scene from their favorite cartoon. But after 30 minutes passed and the silence grew suspiciously thick, he set down his coffee and peeked into the room. What he saw made his breath catch. The living room had been transformed. The couch cushions had been arranged into a makeshift stage. The area rug was now covered with construction paper stars, each drawn with crayons and glitter glue. They had pushed the coffee table aside and hung a crooked banner made from ripped notebook paper taped together in a long row. It read, "The Great Daddy Show," in big, lopsided letters. Ava stood in the center, wearing her princess crown, holding a toy microphone. Lily stood beside her with a flashlight pointed dramatically toward the spot where Marcus was now frozen in the doorway. "We present," Ava declared in a grand announcer voice, "the most amazing, brave, super talented singer in the world, Daddy Ellis." Lily added a drumroll with her mouth, then turned the flashlight toward him like a spotlight. Marcus blinked. "What is all this?" "It's your practice stage," Ava explained, "so you can rehearse without mean people watching." "And we're audience," Lily added, "but only the good kind." He stepped slowly into the room, overwhelmed. The floor was covered in their drawings, guitars, microphones, hearts, stars, even stick figures of them with sparkles all around. A cardboard box had been flipped over and labeled "Applause Button" in marker with red hearts drawn on top. Ava held out a pretend set list. "You can pick any song. We'll clap no matter what." Marcus knelt down, his throat tight. "Girls, this is amazing. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll sing," Lily whispered. He looked at their faces, shining with pride, innocent and determined, full of hope that hadn't yet been bent by the weight of the world. They didn't care what the town said. They didn't hear the whispers. They didn't see the stares. They only saw their father, the man who told bedtime stories in funny voices and carried them through snowy streets like it was nothing. So he picked up his guitar, and he sang. The notes came softly at first, rough around the edges, but soon his voice settled into the melody. The girls swayed with the rhythm, clapping along when he nodded for them to join. By the second verse, they were harmonizing off-key but joyfully loud. When the song ended, Ava slammed the applause button, and Lily threw handfuls of glitter into the air from a cup they'd hidden behind the couch. "Encore!" they shouted in unison. Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. The rest of the day unfolded with unexpected magic. They choreographed silly dances for his second song. Ava insisted on being the lighting technician and turned the living room lamp on and off for dramatic effect. Lily handed him costume options from her dress-up bin, and Marcus performed one number wearing a feather boa and a sparkly cape that barely fit around his shoulders. They rehearsed for hours, and with every song, every burst of laughter, every cheer from the living room floor, something heavy began to lift from Marcus's chest. For the first time since the whispers began, he didn't feel ridiculous. He felt alive. That night, after the girls had finally gone to bed, their hair dusted with glitter, their cheeks pink with laughter, Marcus sat on the edge of the couch, guitar in hand, and strummed the song Natalie had suggested. He played it twice, eyes closed, until the lyrics no longer felt foreign on his tongue. Then he reached for his phone and opened a blank note. He started listing things he needed for the show. Fresh strings, a shirt that didn't have a logo on it, maybe something decent to wear. He wasn't ready to call it confidence, but the simple act of preparing, of thinking about what might come next, felt like a revolution. The following morning, Marcus took the girls to the thrift store. While they browsed the toy aisle, he wandered back and found a black button-down shirt that fit surprisingly well. The clerk gave him a discount without asking. Maybe she'd heard the whispers too, but this time she didn't look at him with pity, just kindness. On the way home, they stopped at the park. The sky was pale blue, and the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and cold earth. Marcus pushed Ava and Lily on the swings, their giggles rising into the air like birds, and thought, for the first time in a long time, that maybe things didn't have to stay the way they were. But as they walked back to the truck, something happened. A notification pinged on Marcus's phone. He pulled it from his jacket and saw a text from one of the mechanics at work. "You've seen this yet?" Attached was a link. Marcus clicked it. His breath stopped. There, on a local community page, was a photo, him, from 3 years ago, slouched on a bench outside the garage, covered in grease. Sweat soaking through his shirt, a sandwich half-eaten in his lap. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly open, caught mid-blink in the kind of moment no one would want to be remembered by. The caption read, "Still single, still stuck. Hashtag Milwaukee Dad Life." Beneath it, the comments were piling up. "Bro needs a treadmill, not a guitar. Is this the guy who's supposed to sing at the school? Yikes. Hope the stage has insurance." Marcus stared at the screen, his hands numb. Ava tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," he didn't answer. "Is something wrong?" Lily asked. He forced a smile. "No, let's head home." That night, after dinner, the girls colored in silence while Marcus sat alone in the kitchen. The phone lay face down on the table. The guitar was still in its case. He didn't want to play anymore. Didn't want to be seen. But as the lights dimmed and bedtime approached, Ava and Lily found him sitting in the dark, his silhouette barely visible against the glow from the streetlight outside. They climbed into his lap without a word, and after a moment, Ava whispered, "We don't care what anyone says." Lily pressed her cheek against his chest. "We just want you to sing." Marcus closed his eyes and held them tighter than he ever had. By Monday, the photo had made its way to every corner of Marcus's life. It was on neighborhood forums, reposted in parenting Facebook groups, and even mentioned in whispers outside Ava and Lily's classroom. What had started as a single cruel snapshot, shared without consent, born from nothing but someone's idle meanness, had spiraled into a viral loop of mockery and schadenfreude. Marcus Ellis, the mechanic from the donut shop apartment, was now unofficially labeled as Milwaukee's sad dad. He deleted his social media accounts before noon, not because he feared the comments. He had endured worse. But because every time he opened his phone, he saw not just himself but how others saw him. Slouched, sweat-stained, unflattering in every possible way. The image had caught him at his lowest. But none of those strangers knew the context. That the day it had been taken, he had been working a double shift and skipped lunch to pick up spare parts for someone else's deadline. That he had sat for 5 minutes, exhausted, alone, trying to finish a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. They didn't see a man who was tired. They saw a man to ridicule, The comments weren't just cruel. They were efficient in their venom. This guy is what happens when you give up on life. Why is he even allowed to go on stage? Call child services. I'd pay not to hear him sing. Marcus read them until he couldn't anymore. The twins noticed a shift immediately. Tuesday morning, he didn't sing while making breakfast. He forgot to pack napkins in their lunch boxes. He drove them to school in silence, barely responding when they recited lines from their favorite cartoon. By afternoon, he had skipped his usual stop at the music shop, and instead of practicing the garage, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the open guitar case like it was a coffin. The girls tried to distract him. Lily performed a puppet show using socks. Ava danced in a tutu with glow sticks from last Halloween. But nothing could reach him to the fog that had settled in his mind. Wednesday evening, after a quiet dinner, he excused himself and went for a walk. It was cold, the kind that pinch the skin and press against your lungs. He wandered through side streets, his boots crunching through brittle leaves, shoulders hunched against the wind. He passed storefront preparing for winter, saw parents with toddlers bundled up like marshmallows, caught glimpses of houses filled with warm light and laughter. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt like he belonged anywhere but with his daughters, and even that feeling, once his anchor, now felt fragile. He ended up in front of the music shop, without realizing he'd been heading there. The lights inside were on, casting a soft glow through the display window. Instruments lined the walls like silent companions. The store was empty, except for Natalie, who was tuning a cello on the counter. She looked up and saw him immediately. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She just watched. Marcus turned to leave, but then she appeared in the doorway. "You weren't going to come in?" she asked, arms crossed against the cold. He hesitated. "Didn't want to bother you." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside, holding the door open. "Coming anyway?" The warmth inside hit him like a wave. Not just the heat, but the smell of wood, the faint buzz of ambient music. The familiarity of a place that had been one of the few safe spaces in recent weeks. Natalie didn't offer pleasantries. She just motioned toward the worn stool near the acoustic guitars. Marcus sat, but didn't touch any instruments. She leaned against the counter, arms still folded. "I saw the post." He nodded. "I also saw the comments." He said nothing. Natalie took a deep breath. "Do you know what I saw when I looked at that photo?" "I don't think I want to know." "I saw a man who looked like he hadn't sat down in 10 hours, who hadn't eaten, who was trying to get through a long, heavy day." He shook his head, looking at the floor. "They don't care about any of that." "They don't, but I do, and your daughters do. I should drop out of the show." Natalie didn't react, just waited. "It's gone too far," Marcus continued. "People are expecting a joke. They want to see me crash. If I get on that stage, it's not going to be music they hear. It's going to be every insult they've already written in their heads. You think your girls signed you up because they wanted you to be perfect? I think they signed me up before the world reminded them who I really am." Natalie stepped forward slowly, pulling something from beneath the counter, a black case. She sat on the stool beside him and opened it gently. Inside was a guitar, but not the same one. This one was older, the wood more worn, the strings slightly dulled. The body bore a few scratches, and the fretboard was smoother from years of use. Marcus recognized it instantly. "That's a J45. "My dad," she said. "He passed it down to me. I played it all through college." Marcus stared at it. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm giving it to you for Friday night." He looked up sharply. "I can't take that." "You're not taking it," Natalie said. "You're borrowing it. Because the one thing louder than the whispers out there," she gestured vaguely toward the door, "is the sound of someone who refuses to let them win." Marcus swallowed hard, throat burning. "I don't think I can do it," he whispered. "Then don't do it for them." She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Do it for the little girls who made a stage out of pillows. For the man who still remembers how to tell the truth with a song. For the part of you that's still alive, even if he's buried under all the noise." Marcus reached out and placed his fingers gently on the strings. They hummed under his touch. Familiar, forgiving. Natalie stepped back. You're stronger than they think, and you're not alone. He left the shop that night with a guitar in hand, wrapped in a soft case, and Natalie's words echoing in his mind. At home, the twins were asleep, curled into each other like two halves of a shared dream. He stood in the doorway of their room for a long time, watching their small chests rise and fall. Then he went to the garage and played for hours. He didn't sing to impress. He didn't play to escape. He played because it was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that reminded him of who he'd been before the noise, before the photo, before the whispers. He didn't know if he was ready for Friday, but for the first time since everything unraveled, he didn't feel ashamed. He felt something else. Like maybe, just maybe, he still had a song worth singing. Friday morning arrived draped in fog. A thin mist curled around the rooftops and hovered over the narrow Milwaukee streets, like a hush before something sacred. Inside the Ellis apartment, the girls were already buzzing with excitement. Ava had laid out her favorite glitter sneakers the night before, and Lily was wearing the same pink headband she had insisted would bring them maximum talent magic. Marcus, however, moved through the morning in near silence. Not because he was reluctant, not anymore, but because the weight of the moment had finally settled into his bones. He'd played every night since Natalie handed him her father's guitar. He'd sung the folk song until the lyrics became muscle memory. He had even practiced speaking into an imaginary mic, telling the crowd his name and pretending not to flinch. And still, a voice lingered. Would they laugh anyway? The girls didn't notice his quiet. They were too busy finalizing their skit, a goofy, pun-filled comedy act they had written and rewritten a dozen times on construction paper. They had begged to go on stage with him, and though he'd tried to explain the nerves involved, they had been relentless. "Daddy, it's a family talent show," Ava had insisted. "You're the family," Lily added. So he'd agreed they would do the skit together. Then he'd stay for the song. As the afternoon crept toward evening, Marcus laid out the black button-down shirt he'd found at the thrift store. He shaved, trimmed his beard, put on a fresh pair of jeans, and then he took a long look in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him didn't look transformed. Not thinner, not cleaner, not radically changed, but he looked present, alive. He adjusted the collar of his shirt and nodded once. Then the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Natalie standing there, hair tied back in a loose braid, her cheeks pink from the cold. She held a small box in her hands. "I thought you could use this," she said. Marcus stepped aside to let her in. The girls squealed when they saw her, running over with arms flailing. Miss Natalie. "Hey, stars of the show," she greeted, handing Ava the box. "This one's for your dad." Ava delivered the box to Marcus with great ceremony. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, were two items: a harmonica, polished and gleaming, and a folded piece of sheet music. He picked it up, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten, a song she'd written herself. "I used to play this one with my dad," Natalie said softly. "I thought maybe if you ever wanted something new to work on." He looked down at the music. The chords were simple. The lyrics, poetic, earnest. It was a song about home. Not a place, but a feeling. The way it follows you, waits for you, fights to stay alive inside you even when everything else tries to bury it. He swallowed hard, overcome with emotion. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just keep playing." He nodded, closing the box carefully. The rest of the hour passed in a blur. Marcus tuned the guitar one last time while the girls practiced their skit behind the couch. He checked his bag 3 times to make sure the extra strings and harmonica were packed. He drank half a glass of water and paced the kitchen floor, as if walking in circles could calm the storm inside him. And then it was time. The auditorium at the school was already buzzing when they arrived. Folding chairs filled every inch of the space. Parents in puffy coats juggled toddlers and phones. The stage lights glared down on a simple wooden platform framed by hand-painted stars and tissue paper streamers. A big cardboard sign above the stage read "Family Talent Night" in multicolored letters. Marcus held the girls' hands as they made their way to the backstage area. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. "We've never been more ready," Ava said. "Ever," Lily added. A volunteer wearing a lanyard waved them over. "You're the finale?" Marcus nodded, his voice catching. "Yeah. You'll be up right after the Johnson twins tap dance. We'll cue you when it's time." They waited backstage for nearly 40 minutes. The girls clapped along to the other acts, a dad doing magic tricks, a grandmother playing the ukulele, a middle schooler performing stand-up comedy about cafeteria food. Each act brought laughter and cheers. But as the end of the night drew closer, Marcus felt his pulse rising. He tried to stretch, tried to breathe slowly. But the same question kept looping in his head. What if I fail? And then he felt it. 2 small hands, gripping either side of his. He looked down. "We're not scared," Ava said. "We're ready to be amazing," Lily echoed. He smiled, not because he felt confident, but because they did. Their names were called. The volunteer gave them a thumbs up, and together, the 3 of them stepped into the light. The spotlight wasn't harsh, just bright enough to obscure the faces in the crowd. But Marcus didn't need to see them. He could feel the presence of the room, the shifting of weight in chairs, the rustle of winter coats, the low buzz of expectation. Ava took center stage with the toy microphone. "Good evening, Milwaukee," she announced in her best announcer voice. Lily jumped in. "We're the Ellis girls, and this is our dad." A ripple of laughter. "Tonight, we're bringing you our original comedy routine, followed by the musical stylings of the one and only Marcus Ellis." Marcus raised his hand in mock embarrassment, and the crowd chuckled again. The skit was a whirlwind of knock-knock jokes, silly impressions, and a dramatic reenactment of a typical school morning in which Marcus played the role of the perpetually sleepy dad, complete with exaggerated snoring and a fake beard made from yarn. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even entirely coherent, but it was joyful. When the skit ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Marcus helped the girls down from their stools and kissed them each on the forehead. Then he turned toward the mic. He adjusted the strap on Natalie's guitar, checked the tuning, took one last deep breath. "This one," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "is for my daughters." He began to play. The first notes rang out soft and steady, filling the space like sunlight through old curtains. His voice followed, not loud, not perfect, but honest. Each lyric was a step forward, each chord a breath taken. He sang about home, about being seen, about holding on when the world tries to turn you invisible. As the second verse began, he closed his eyes. He didn't think about the photo. He didn't think about the comments. He thought about the girls, about their cardboard stage and glitter stars, about Natalie's song and the weight of the harmonica waiting in his pocket. And when he reached the final chorus, he played that harmonica. The notes soared above the crowd, imperfect but filled with soul. The room was still. No whispers, no laughter, just silence. And then applause. Slow at first, then louder. People stood, clapped, cheered. Someone shouted his name. In the back row, he saw Natalie stand, hands clasped, eyes glassy. Ava and Lily jumped up from the front row and ran toward him. He knelt as they reached him, and they wrapped their arms around his neck. "You did it," Ava whispered. "You were amazing," Lily said. Marcus Ellis stood up, guitar still in hand, and took a bow, not for the crowd, but for the girls at his side. The whispers had been loud, but the music was louder. The applause still rang in Marcus's ears as they stepped off the stage, the sound not fading so much as lingering, like a warmth that refused to leave. He held the guitar tightly in one hand and Ava's fingers in the other, while Lily clung to his coat, bouncing slightly as they made their way toward the side hallway that led to the backstage area. Volunteers gave them wide smiles. One of the janitors gave Marcus a thumbs up as he passed by, and a mother from Lily's class leaned down to whisper, "You were incredible," before disappearing into the crowd. Marcus didn't know how to respond to any of it. He had expected a polite reception, a few claps out of obligation, maybe a couple of smiles because of the girls. But the standing ovation, the cheers, the genuine admiration, this felt surreal, like he had walked into someone else's story. Once backstage, the girls exploded with excitement. You hit every note. Ava shouted, spinning in a circle, even the high part. And the harmonica, Lily added, still holding onto his coat. People loved the harmonica. They danced around him like confetti, throwing praise and giggles into the air. Marcus let himself laugh, more from disbelief than anything else, but slowly, as the adrenaline wore off and the hallway emptied, the reality of what had just happened began to settle into something deeper. He had done it, not just survived the stage, but owned it. Can we get snacks now? Ava asked, tugging on his hand. Yes. Lily seconded. Miss Natalie said she brought cupcakes. At the mention of Natalie's name, Marcus felt a different kind of warmth rise in his chest. He hadn't seen her again after the performance. The last glimpse had been from the stage, her standing at the back of the auditorium, hands clasped, a glint of something unmistakably tender in her eyes. He nodded. Let's go find her. The post-show reception was held in the cafeteria, where rows of tables had been pushed aside to make room for paper tablecloths, trays of cookies, boxes of juice, and enough balloons to anchor a parade. Kids were still buzzing with excitement, some still in costume, others wearing medals made of glitter foam and yarn. Marcus walked in slowly, the girls leading the way, their voices calling out for Natalie before they even reached the dessert table. He spotted her near the far corner, setting down a tray of cupcakes with frosting that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. She was talking with a group of parents, but looked up the moment she heard Ava's voice. There she is. Ava shouted, pointing. Told you she wouldn't leave. Natalie smiled and excused herself from the group. As she walked toward them, Marcus felt his throat tighten again, not from nerves this time, but from something quieter, steadier. Connection. You found us, she said, handing Lily a cupcake. You promised dessert, Marcus replied, managing a smile. Did I lie? He shook his head, reaching for a napkin as Ava smeared frosting across her cheek. No, you never do. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by noise and light, watching the girls devour their cupcakes as if they hadn't eaten in days. Natalie handed Marcus a small paper plate with 2 more. He accepted it without a word. That song, she said softly. You made it yours. I tried. It worked. He hesitated. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he leaned in just slightly. Thank you for the guitar, for the song, for not letting me back out. She looked at him, her smile soft but unwavering. You didn't need me for that. You were always going to do it. You just didn't believe it yet. They stood together, silent for a while, watching Ava chase Lily around the snack table, while trailing a streamer she had somehow tied to her wrist. Will you keep playing? Natalie asked. I think I have to now. I might have a fan club. Natalie chuckled. Well, if you ever want a duet, I know where to find you. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream. Parents approached him one by one, some hesitantly, others more openly, offering congratulations, praise, stories of how they'd been moved by the performance. One father admitted he hadn't expected much, then quickly backtracked and added that he was completely blown away. A teacher from the girls' school asked if Marcus had ever considered helping with the spring musical. Even the janitor from earlier stopped by again just to say, You made people feel something tonight. That matters. From Marcus, who had spent years hiding in the background of his own life. It was almost too much to absorb. He kept one hand on the guitar case at all times, as if afraid someone would realize he didn't belong in the spotlight and try to take it back. But no one did, not even once. Later, after the cleanup had begun and the cafeteria started to thin out, Natalie approached with 2 paper cups of warm cider and a quiet question. Walk with me? He nodded. The girls were curled up on a bench near the exit, already half asleep, their sugar rush long since faded. Marcus lifted Ava in one arm. Natalie took Lily's hand, and together they stepped out into the cold night. The air was sharp, the stars blurred by a thin haze. Their breath came out in little clouds as they walked slowly down the sidewalk. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them didn't demand filling. Finally, Natalie glanced up. You ever think this would happen? What? Singing again? No. Believing again. Marcus thought about it. About the photo. The comments. The long nights in the garage. The cardboard stage. The harmonica. The fear. And the moment it all broke open, not on stage, but in the stillness just before it, when his daughters whispered they didn't care what anyone said. I think, he said, I forgot how much I needed to. Natalie nodded. I think we all forget. They reached the truck, its windows already gathering a sheen of frost. Marcus opened the back door and gently set Ava inside. Natalie helped buckle Lily in, brushing a strand of hair from the little girl's forehead as she did. Then she turned to Marcus, her breath curling between them like a ribbon. I'm glad you sang. I'm glad you came. They stood close, not quite touching. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. My number, she said, in case you ever want to talk, or sing, or share cupcakes. Marcus took it, folding it carefully before sliding it into his wallet. I'll call, he said, and for the first time, he meant it without hesitation. They said goodnight, and Natalie stepped back as Marcus climbed into the driver's seat. He started the truck, the engine grumbling like an old friend, and as they pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of her standing in the glow of the school lights, one hand in her pocket, the other lifted in a quiet wave. Ava stirred beside him, mumbling in her sleep. Did they clap for us? He smiled. They clapped for all of us. And in the rear-view mirror, the auditorium disappeared behind them, but the sound of applause? It stayed. The next morning, the city awoke as usual. Delivery trucks rumbled along Milwaukee's early streets, the scent of snow barely held back by the heavy clouds. Donut shops lit their windows. Buses hissed at corners, and the cold crept in quietly beneath doorways. But inside the Ellis apartment, something felt different. Marcus didn't feel it when he opened his eyes. He was still groggy from the late night, and unsure if the entire evening had been real. He didn't feel it when he padded into the kitchen and saw the mess of juice boxes and cupcake wrappers left from the after-party. But he felt it when he turned on his phone. He had reactivated his accounts before bed, expecting the usual storm of noise. But what waited for him wasn't mockery. It was admiration. The video had been posted sometime around midnight. Grainy footage, filmed from the back of the school auditorium. It captured the second verse's performance and the harmonica solo, then cut to the standing ovation, the cheers rising like a wave. Someone had captioned it. The moment Milwaukee stopped whispering, it already had thousands of views. He stared at the screen in disbelief. Comment after comment poured in. Who is this guy? That was incredible. I cried. I don't even know why. Maybe because it was real. Everyone made fun of him for so long, and he just shut the whole city up. Legend. The words scrolled past too fast to absorb. For every cruel joke from before, there were now 5 people silencing it. Strangers defended him. Some even apologized. Others began reposting the clip with hashtags like hashtag Dad of the Year, hashtag Milwaukee Voice, and hashtag Real Man Real Music. His name was no longer a punchline. It was a headline. He placed the phone down gently and leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling with wide, disbelieving eyes. He hadn't done anything but be himself. No flashy performance. No viral gimmick. Just a song. A voice. The truth. He heard movement from the hallway. The soft patter of socked feet. Ava appeared first, followed by Lily, both rubbing their eyes, their hair wild from sleep. You're famous, Ava said, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. Marcus blinked. What? Lily held up her tablet. Everyone at school saw it already. I'm in it too, Ava added proudly. Twice. They climbed onto the couch beside him, sandwiching in between them. Do we have to go to school? Lily asked, or can we do interviews? Marcus chuckled. You're going to school. Fame doesn't cancel fractions. They groaned in protest, but smiled anyway. By the time they arrived at school, the parking lot buzzed with unusual energy. A teacher near the entrance waved at them enthusiastically. A group of students pointed and whispered, but not with ridicule. It was awe. The same looks reserved for professional athletes and local legends. One of the parents approached him with tears in her eyes. "My son didn't want to go to the show," she said. "He thinks talent shows are lame, but now he wants to learn guitar." Marcus shook her hand, humble beyond words. Back at the garage, things were different too. The same guys who used to chuckle under their breath now slapped him on the back, grinning like proud cousins. His boss called him into the office just to say, "Hell of a performance. Should have charged for tickets." Even the teenager who'd once snickered at the graffiti in the restroom now asked where Marcus had learned to play like that. "Just a few garage nights," Marcus replied, smirking. He fixed cars that day with a quiet ease, humming between socket turns and hood checks. The city had not changed. The sky still threatened snow. The coffee still tasted burnt. But the space Marcus occupied within that city had shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. At lunch, he checked his phone again. The video had crossed 10,000 views. There was a message request from a local news outlet, another from a cafe asking if he'd be interested in performing. He stared at the screen, stunned. That evening, after the girls had finished their homework and dinner was cleared, Marcus found himself back in the garage. He opened the guitar case slowly, almost reverently, and sat on the old stool with the fraying cushion. He played the same song again, but this time he played it like it belonged to him. Halfway through the second verse, he heard the garage door creak open behind him. Natalie stepped inside, holding a thermos in one hand and a bag of what smelled like fresh cookies in the other. "You're hard to reach," she said. "I'm suddenly very popular." "I notice." He smiled, setting the guitar aside. "Coffee, hot chocolate, even better." She handed it to him, then sat on the stack of crates nearby. They didn't speak right away. The music still hung in the air. "Do you know what I saw when I watched the video?" she asked. Marcus looked up. "I saw a man who stopped hiding." "I didn't mean to," he replied. "I just had no choice. The girls weren't going to let me quit." "They saved you." He nodded. "They always do." She reached into the bag and handed him a cookie. "So what now, Rockstar?" "I don't know. Maybe play more. Not for crowds. Just for me. For them." Natalie smiled. "Or maybe for anyone who needs to hear it." He took a bite of the cookie and raised an eyebrow. "These taste expensive. Store-bought. But let's keep that between us." He laughed, full and free. For a long while, they just sat together. Two people who had almost given up on being noticed, now finding comfort in shared silence. Before she left, Natalie turned him at the door. "Friday night changed something," she said. "For me too." She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. Not a polite, quick hug, but a real one. One that held gratitude, pride, maybe even the start of something else. When she pulled back, she looked him in the eyes. "Don't stop playing, Marcus. You have more to say than you think." He watched her walk down the driveway, the cold nipping at her coat, her breath visible in the dim light. Inside, the twins were already asleep. He checked on them, pulling the blanket higher over their shoulders. Then he returned to the garage and picked up the guitar again. And this time, he didn't sing someone else's song. He started writing his own. The cold had settled into the city, like it intended to stay. Morning frost lined the sidewalks for hours past sunrise, and the sky above Milwaukee wore a curtain of thick, unmoving clouds. But for Marcus Ellis, something beneath the surface was warming again. Not in his skin or his hands, but somewhere deeper, somewhere he hadn't felt stir in years. A full week had passed since the talent show. The attention had begun to level out, the online fervor cooling into something steadier, more personal. The views on the video continued to climb, but the comments had become less about the moment and more about the man. People began recognizing him not just as a dad who sang at the school, but as Marcus, a neighbor, a voice, a story worth knowing. At Nelson's Auto Repair, the dynamic had shifted for good. Customers lingered longer at the counter, some asking about his music, others dropping off their cars just to say they had caught the video. A man from a local cafe stopped by the shop, offering Marcus a slot on Friday nights. The invitation wasn't grand, a small stage by the window and a modest crowd, but it was a kind of gesture that didn't need to be big to mean everything. He hadn't said yes yet. He wasn't hesitating because of fear. This time, it was something else. The question of how far he wanted to let the new version of himself stretch, and how much of his old world he wanted to bring with him. Ava and Lily were thriving on the attention. Their teachers printed out stills from a video and hung them in the hallway. One of the cafeteria monitors started calling them the Sparkle Scouts, which they adopted without shame. The twins proudly told anyone who asked, and many who didn't, that their daddy was famous now. He's a rock star, Ava said to her dentist. The best one, Lily added mid-cleaning. At home, Marcus had taken to playing in the living room more often, letting his music mingle with the ordinary rhythm of family life. While the girls colored or danced or read, he sat near the window with the guitar Natalie had lent him and tried to shape pieces of new songs. Not for crowds, not for screens, just for them. That's where he was one evening when the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Natalie standing there with 2 cupcakes in a brown paper box and a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. "You promised me a call," she said, no trace of disappointment in her tone. "I did," Marcus replied, holding the door open wider. "Come in before your fingers fall off." She stepped inside, brushing off the cold. The apartment smelled of crayons and soup and something vaguely sweet. The girls' drawings covered the fridge. Glitter flecks sparkled from the corners of the couch. "Where are the stars of the show?" she asked, handing him the box. "In the bath, covered in bubbles and arguing over which one of them invented glitter." Natalie laughed and looked around. "It's warmer in here than I imagined." "Radiator has a mind of its own," Marcus said, setting the cupcakes on the counter. "And I bake sometimes. Keeps the heat up." He pulled out 2 mismatched plates and offered her a seat at the table. She sat, unwinding her scarf and tucking it into her coat sleeve. "Lily told me you might sing at the cafe next week." "She's a terrible secret keeper," Marcus said, cutting into a cupcake. "But she's not wrong. They offer me Friday nights. And I haven't decided yet." Natalie tilted her head, curious but not pushy. "Why not?" He hesitated, trying to find the truth in the noise. "I think I just want to be sure I'm doing it for the right reasons." "Which are?" He looked across the table at her. Her eyes were steady calm. The same way they'd looked at him backstage. The same way they'd looked at him in the garage. Not judging, not pushing, just seeing. "I want to sing because I love it," he said slowly. "Not because people suddenly decided to clap." She nodded. "Then say yes. You'll know it's yours." They sat in silence for a moment. Marcus took a bite of his cupcake. "Chocolate. Rich. Still warm." "You baked these?" he asked. "I bought them. From a place that puts lavender in everything. I figure if I brought homemade ones again, you'd start expecting more. I already do." She smiled and took a sip of the tea he'd made. The quiet between them was easy now, the kind that didn't require performance or constant conversation. It was a quiet that came from knowing someone had already seen you at your most vulnerable and stayed anyway. After a while, Natalie stood. "I should let you go," she said, before the glitter argument turns violent. Marcus walked her to the door. The cold air rushed in when he opened it. She didn't move immediately. "I meant what I said," she added, "about seeing you sing. It wasn't just about the music. It was about seeing you." He swallowed. "I've spent a long time making sure people didn't." "I know." They stood there, the threshold between them, warm inside, winter outside. "I didn't think anyone would ever look at me the way they used to," Marcus said quietly. "The way people used to when I was younger, when I thought anything was possible." Natalie stepped closer. "I don't see you the way people used to," she said. He raised his eyes to hers. "I see you now." There was no grand gesture, no cinematic swell, just her hand reaching for his, resting there, warm and real. Just 2 people finding each other after thinking they never would again. And in that moment, something in Marcus settled, not finished, not solved, but steadied. Later that night, after the girls were asleep and the house was quiet again, Marcus sat with a borrowed guitar in his lap, staring at a blank page. He began writing a new song, not about pain, not about struggle, but about becoming visible again. He didn't know what would come next. whether he'd play at the cafe or return the guitar or fall flat at the next performance. But he knew this. He wasn't hiding anymore. And in Natalie's eyes, the promise wasn't just that she saw him. The promise was that she would keep doing so. The first snowfall of the season arrived quietly, without ceremony. It began with flurries drifting through the air like dust, then grew into a soft cascade that blanketed the streets by morning. Milwaukee transformed overnight into something still, bright, and muted. The city's usual clatter wrapped in white, its sharp edges dulled by cold. Inside the apartment above the donut shop, Marcus stood at the window in his thick socks and flannel shirt, sipping coffee and watching the snow coat the street below. He could see the faint outline of the boutique, where Natalie sometimes helped her sister. And further down, the music shop where she had first handed him a guitar and changed the direction of his entire winter. Behind him, the apartment had become something else too. The living room now held a small but earnest Christmas tree, decorated with paper ornaments and strings of popcorn. The girls had insisted on putting a cutout of Marcus's face, a printed photo from the talent night, at the top instead of an angel. He had protested. They had unanimously overruled him. The calendar pinned to the fridge had a red circle around Friday, and beneath it, in Lily's handwriting, "Dad sings again." It was happening. The cafe downtown had confirmed the first gig. A short set, intimate crowd. A chance for Marcus to share his music. Not as a novelty, not as a viral sensation, but as himself. The invitation had come with no expectations. Just a time, a place, and a simple promise. Be who you are. That's enough. Marcus hadn't made a big deal. He hadn't invited half the neighborhood. He told Natalie. He told the girls. He let the rest unfold on its own. By the time Friday arrived, the snow had settled and hardened, but the sidewalks were clear. Marcus picked the girls up from school, as usual. Ava wore her "Dad is a rock star" hoodie, hand-painted in glitter by Lily, and Lily carried a plastic tambourine she claimed was for backup in case the crowd needed more sparkle. "Are you nervous?" Ava asked as they walked toward the truck. "A little," Marcus admitted. "Good," she said. "That means it matters." At home, he dressed carefully. Dark jeans. The same black shirt from the talent show, freshly ironed. Natalie had insisted it was now his performance uniform. He added a gray vest this time, just to change things up. As he tightened the last button, he looked at himself in the mirror. He had lost nearly 30 pounds since the start of the school year. It wasn't intentional, just a byproduct of moving more, playing more, eating less out of habit, and more out of choice. He still wore a size that didn't come easy in department stores, but the difference wasn't just in the weight. It was in the way he carried himself now. Straighter, steadier. When they arrived at the cafe, the girls ran ahead to claim the best seats. Natalie was already there, setting up a small display of hot cider near the stage. She wore a red sweater, her hair down, and she greeted Marcus with a look that held no surprise, only certainty. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." He sat up slowly, tuned the guitar, adjusted the mic, checked the small handwritten set list he'd tucked into the corner of the guitar case. The same folk song he performed at the talent night sat in the middle of the list. But tonight, he'd open with something new, a song he'd written in the garage during a quiet Tuesday when the wind outside had howled and the girls had fallen asleep early. The place filled quickly, not with cameras, not with viral seekers, with neighbors, friends, parents from the school, people who had whispered once, but now sat in quiet expectation, waiting not for a punchline but performance. He began. The new song, titled Before the Silence, was simple, just a man and a guitar, speaking softly about the moments before everything changes, before you find your voice, before someone sees you, before you remember who you are. It ended in silence, then applause, not wild, not exaggerated, just real. He moved through the set slowly, confidently, a mix of originals and old favorites. At one point, Ava and Lily stood beside him and sang the chorus of a silly song they'd written together about pancakes and glitter socks. The audience laughed. Someone clapped offbeat. Marcus didn't care. It was the best sound in the world. Natalie stood in the back, a cup of cider in her hands, watching every moment like it mattered. Because it did. By the time he closed with a familiar folk song, the one she'd given him in that old sheet of handwritten chords, the room had grown quieter than it had all night. People leaned in. Some closed their eyes. Some held hands. And when the final note faded, Marcus let it sit there for a moment, just long enough. Then the applause came again. Stronger, longer, not just for the song, for the man. When he stepped down from the stage, the first person to reach him was Lily, who jumped into his arms with a shout of, "You did it again!" Ava hugged his leg. That was better than the talent show. Natalie approached last, slower. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around him in a hug that said everything. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in the back seat on the ride home, Marcus pulled up in front of the apartment and turned off the engine. Snow had started again, light like powdered sugar. Natalie sat beside him, quiet. "You were right," he said finally. "About what?" "That I had more to say." "You always did," she replied. "You just needed the world to stop talking long enough to hear it." He nodded, looked out the window at the falling snow. "I never thought this would be my life," he said, "that anyone would care." "They don't care because you became something else," Natalie said, reaching over to take his hand. "They care because you remembered who you've always been." They sat in the quiet for a while, watching the snow blanket the street. The world outside had once felt like a wall, a place he had to prove himself to, defend himself from, hide behind his daughters to survive. Now it felt like something else entirely. Possibility. Days turned into weeks. Marcus returned to the cafe every Friday, always greeted with warm cider and smiles. He kept writing, kept playing. The girls became his unofficial opening act, charming crowd with jokes and tambourines. And slowly, people stopped referencing the photo from months ago. They spoke instead of the music, the voice, the way his daughters lit up when he sang. At home, the sign on the apartment door changed. It used to read, Ella's Residence. Now, in glitter letters on construction paper plaque, "Our dad is a rock star." Marcus didn't take it down. He saw it every time he left for work, every time he came home, and every time it reminded him that he had stepped out from under the weight of other people's expectations. He had sung through the noise. He had become someone the city never saw coming. But most of all, he had become the version of himself that had always been waiting to be heard.